this may be a dual-edged question. I've heard you talking about inherited unhealthy energy patterns, which turn out as being, illness. We can inherit cancer or heart disease or those types of things. And you and I were talking once about this being just energy patterns, dysresonant energy patterns that are kept in the family energy field. Would you care to address that?
So this is the way I look at it. So let's say, for example, you have a grandmother or great grandmother or grandmother who had, let's say, cancer or even diabetes. And because energetically that grandmother has diabetes, the children are brought up seeing that and being told that you have a higher probability, you have a disposition for it, it's in your DNA. And so this is ingrained in the energy of their offspring, who then ingrain it in the energy of their offspring. And it's the same with things like cancer. When that is what you know, and that is what you see, and that is what you're familiar with, and that is what you're led to believe is in the family line, we carry it that way. So it's not so our medical paradigm and our materialist science and medicine seems to believe that it's something that's hardwired into us. It takes our physical body as being all there is to us. It doesn't think in terms of energy, ancestors, consciousness. It doesn't, medicine doesn't think that way. And so it thinks that there is a hard coding in our DNA that has been passed down the line, but it's not a hard coding. It's the software, not the hardware. So it's not like it's in our body, but it's something we've carried energetically and in our consciousness because it's been put into the pattern of the offspring and their offspring. It's been put into their energy pattern, their thought field. That's kind of how I look at it.
Okay. And again, I've read your books, I've heard you speak, but for those who haven't, you have talked about how you know that the cancer that you ended up with was basically a result of thought patterns, self-hatred, self-loathing, that type of thing, not feeling
Fears.
good enough, etc. And even though your parents may not have had the same kind of cancer you had, you sort of inherited these thought patterns from all of the ancestral traditions. Is that accurate?
So semi-accurate. So the thing is, I actually believe, because my parents grew up in India, but long before I was born, they left India. So I did not grow up in India. And I was somebody who was, probably still am, multicultural in that sense, because I grew up with parents who grew up in India. And so their traits and their habits and what they picked up from their ancestors who grew up in India was one thing, but I was then immersed into a completely different culture where I had one culture outside of the home and one culture at home. And what ended up happening, though, is that a combination of feeling like I don't fit in, but also the thought patterns I picked up, many of them were of a culture. I don't know how it so happened, but I was, and I can see that now. I could see that when I was in the near-death experience, but not while I was in it. You can only see in hindsight. But when I was in it, I was immersed in a very material. When I say material, I'm not talking about material wealth, but I'm talking about a focus on physical. Like I was immersed in a world that debunked anything that was non-physical. I was immersed in a world that believed very strongly in the medical paradigm. I was immersed in a world that believed that the way the world is right now was going to kill us, and 1 in 3 people were going to get cancer. I was in a world where I was with people and in a paradigm where I was with people that all we talked about was things like what would cause cancer, that the hormones in chicken causes cancer, that milk causes cancer. It was a thought virus. That's how I would put it. I believe that if I was not immersed in that world and I was immersed in a different world, I would have had different issues. This is why after the near-death experience, I'm able to see how my, the depth of which I had held that fear of cancer. And this, so it's like a dissonance. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but there's this dissonance where you hold the strong belief that the way the world is right now, just about everybody's going to get cancer because the pesticides in the food are causing cancer, the milk is causing cancer, the sunlight is causing cancer, microwaves, plastic bottles, and and so there's this belief like, oh my God, I can't get away from all of this, and yet there is this belief, this feeling that I need to prevent myself from getting cancer. And so I would research everything to do with how to prevent cancer, and I would order all the supplements, and I would be on this really stringent diet, and I lived in this perpetual fear. But I was part of a paradigm, I was part of a culture, a subgroup where I lived that believed that way and thought that way, and it's almost like being in a cult. And this is why now a lot of people say to me, hey, you don't always advocate like what we should eat and shouldn't eat. And I say, no, I advocate freedom from all these things that keep you in fear and keep you locked into fear. I know this is not so much related to ancestral, but to tie it back to that, we can be immersed in thought viruses that are, and energetic viruses that are handed down through our ancestors. But at the same time, we can also receive healing from our ancestors. That's what I believe, because when I crossed over, I felt that that I received healing from them. In other words, the very people, my parents and all, who had also instilled fear in me, my dad particularly, was the very person who set me free when I was on the other side.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was hoping that we could, weave our way back into that, and this is a perfect time. Could you tell us a little bit about what was it like to see your dad again after all this time, and to see that not only was he there for you, but that he was a completely different person than he was when he was in his human suit?
Yes, he was completely different in that. So when we cross over, we shed our, we actually shed our gender and a lot of the cultural beliefs that we accumulated in this lifetime. And when we're on that side, there's like this state of clarity. So just like I was in a state of clarity, my dad was in a state of clarity, as were all the other beings on the other side, my deceased loved ones, all of them were in this state of clarity. And so what happens is that when our ancestors are there, it's like they have this bigger picture, and it's like they can even see the damage that they have done to us, but they're not holding on to that when they cross over. So even if you were abused, even, like my dad didn't abuse me, but he was extremely strict and instilled a lot of fear in me, a lot of fear, which is probably why when I was immersed in this whole other culture that I'm talking about, of being fearful of cancer and all that, when I was immersed in that, I handled it in a very fear-based way, because that's what had been instilled in me by my ancestors. Now, my dad got it from his parents, so it gets handed down to us by our lineage, by our ancestors. It's like we keep perpetuating what it is that we are immersed in. What happened in my case, like with the NDE, it kind of broke that pattern, because if I had children, I would have been instilling that fear onto my children. So when I say that they're so different on the other side, on the other, because I encountered my dad on the other side, it was like he broke that pattern in me.
Okay. Well, did you find that, does there seem to be levels of healingness? I'm not sure how else to say that, where when you first cross over, you're still really connected to your human story, and you still have a lot of things to work out. And
Yes.
then others who have maybe been on the other side for a long while are completely healed. Did you find that there's sort of a gradation that you have to go through?
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is a gradation and levels of healingness, or levels that we move on to on the other side. And the way I kind of look at it is, say, for example, I think some people have different missions, and some of these missions could be bigger missions for the planet. Like, I would say that someone like Wayne Dyer has a bigger mission than my dad. So my dad may be communicating with me, and he may be communicating with my mom and my brother and people who recognize him. But Wayne Dyer is probably communicating with millions of people, because he touched so many lives, that there's millions of people that are able to kind of feel that, oh, wow, that message sounded like it came from Wayne Dyer. He's able to still continue to impact and touch and affect millions of people. And I believe that's what our wonderful sages of the past, like Jesus and Buddha, do. They're able to continue to touch millions of people. So Buddha, Krishna, they continue to touch people because millions of people have heard of them and know who they are. So their mission is much greater than, say, somebody like my dad, who probably has a much humbler mission of still continuing to help my mom and his family members. So there are different grades in that way, yes. I think some people are just more prepared, or we could say maybe more evolved. I tend not to use that, because it kind of feels weird to say, okay, that means my dad's not evolved, and wait, yeah. But maybe it is the case. But it didn't feel like there was a hierarchy. But there are definitely some souls that definitely have a bigger mission. And I feel that the bigger your mission, the more you are guided by the souls with the bigger missions. They kind of match, and they're there when you need it. That's what I tend to feel a lot now with my guidance. I feel guided all the time by ancestors, by deceased loved ones. And it feels like different guidance. So I can sense immediately when it's my dad, but my dad's is more like the homey, comforting, it's like your dad. But I can sense when it's somebody bigger, like saying, no, this is it. You've got to go for this. This is your mission. It's something much bigger. I can sense when it's different people guiding me.
Right. I totally get what you're saying. I see Snoopy when when it's my dad. The Snoopy's around, and then a message comes. Okay, that was Dad.